A little girl with death-painted eyes locked onto a Hell's Angel in a Wyoming grocery store, and what she did with her face in the next 3 seconds either saved her life or signed her death warrant. What happened next will haunt you. Before we dive in, where in the world are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happened in Casper, Wyoming, could happen anywhere, and it probably already has. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because we tell the stories nobody else will, the ones about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when the world looks away. We're building a digital campfire for folks who still believe good can triumph over evil. And you're part of that tribe now. Now, let's get into the story. The Harley's engine cut through the Wyoming silence like a chainsaw through bone. Rufus Ironhead. Thorn downshifted as the speed limit sign appeared, a rusted metal warning that civilization was creeping up on him, whether he liked it or not. Out here on Highway 220, a man could ride for 50 miles without seeing another soul, just the way he preferred it. The high plains stretched out on both sides of the cracked asphalt, endless and unforgiving, the kind of landscape that made small men feel smaller and hard men feel right at home. He rolled his shoulders beneath the leather vest, the colors. 20 years he'd worn that patch, 20 years of blood, brotherhood, and a code that meant more than any law written in some courthouse. The wind had chapped his face red despite the full beard that covered most of it, grey streaking through the brown like winter frost on dead grass. His bald head gleamed under the late afternoon sun, and his arms, thick as fence posts, showed the blur of ink that marked a life lived on the margins. But what people didn't know, what they couldn't see behind the mirrored sunglasses and the skull rings, was that Rufus Thorn followed rules. His rules, and rule number 1 was simple: protect the weak, punish the wicked. The Casper city limit sign blurred past. Population 59,038, Rufus snorted. Might as well be New York City, compared to where he'd been camping the last 3 nights, a spot off Forest Road 111, where the only company was coyotes and the ghosts of cattle drives long dead. He needed coffee. Real coffee, not the instant shit he'd been boiling over a camp stove. He needed a thick steak he could barely chew. And he needed to get back on the road before the wolves in badges started asking questions about why a Hell's Angel was loitering in their sleepy town. The Save-A-Lot appeared on his right, a squat, ugly building with a parking lot that had more potholes than asphalt. Good enough. Rufus guided the bike into a spot near the edge, far from the minivans and sedans clustered near the entrance like frightened sheep. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost offensive. When he swung his leg off the bike, his knees popped. 53 years old, and every one of those years had left a mark. The arthritis in his right hand was getting worse. The hand he'd broken twice in bar fights he barely remembered. But he could still grip a throttle. He could still throw a punch that'd drop a bull. And he could still see. That was the thing about men like Rufus. They noticed things, the way a man walked, the way a woman clutched her purse, the way kids moved loose and free or stiff and scared. He adjusted his vest, feeling the weight of it. The patches told a story, the chapter, the territory, the years. Hell's Angels curved across his back in letters that made people cross the street. Beneath it, the Death's Head grinned its eternal grin. And below that, the rocker, Wyoming. This was his home. These plains, these mountains, these forgotten towns where the American dream had gone to die and somehow kept shambling forward anyway. Rufus pushed through the automatic doors, and the grocery store swallowed him whole. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that industrial buzz that made his teeth ache. The air smelled like bleach and old produce, and somewhere a speaker was playing a country song so watered down it might as well have been elevator music. He grabbed a red basket, the plastic handle too small for his calloused hand. A woman with 2 kids took one look at him and steered her cart down a different aisle. Rufus didn't react. He'd stopped caring about that kind of thing 20 years ago. Let them be scared. Scared people were polite people. He moved through the store with purpose, coffee aisle first, then toward the meat counter in the back. His boots echoed on the linoleum. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of a man who took up space and didn't apologize for it, but something felt wrong. Rufus had learned to trust that feeling. It was the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 prison stints and more fights than he could count. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. His hand instinctively moved toward his belt, where he used to carry a blade before the last parole officer had made it clear that was a one-way ticket back to Rawlins. He turned the corner into the cereal aisle, and that's when he saw the snake. The tattoo crawled up the man's forearm like it was still alive. Black ink, coiled scales, a serpent wrapped around itself in an infinity loop, fangs bared at the wrist. Rufus's eyes locked on it first, before he even registered the man's face, before he saw what the man was holding. The guy was maybe 35. Rail-thin with that tweaker energy that made Rufus's jaw tighten. Greasy hair pulled back in a ponytail, a faded Metallica shirt that had seen better decades. His right hand was wrapped around something small. Not something. Someone. A little girl's wrist. Rufus's blood went cold. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, brown hair hanging in limp strands around her face. A bright green sweatshirt that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, the kind of color that should have meant playgrounds and birthday parties. But it was her face that made Rufus forget how to breathe. Dark circles ringed her eyes like someone had taken charcoal and smeared it around the sockets. The effect was skeletal, nightmarish, like looking at a child's corpse that was still walking. Her skin was pale, almost grey, and her lips were pressed into a thin line that no kid her age should know how to make. She looked wrong. Deliberately wrong. And she wasn't making a sound. The man-snake tattoo was pulling her along, his grip tight enough that his knuckles had gone white. The girl stumbled to keep up, her little sneakers squeaking on the linoleum with each forced step. Squeak, drag, squeak, drag. Other shoppers moved past them like water around a rock. An elderly woman glanced over, saw the dark-eyed child, and quickly looked away, too disturbing to process, easier to pretend she hadn't seen it. A stockboy restacking soup cans kept his head down. Nobody wanted to get involved. Nobody. Except Rufus. He stood there at the end of the aisle, a 6'3" wall of leather and muscle, watching. His basket hung forgotten in his hand. The coffee he'd come for suddenly seemed like the stupidest thing in the world, because he knew that look. He'd seen it in Kabul, back when he was 19, and stupid enough to think the army was his ticket out of a nowhere town. He'd seen it in the eyes of women being dragged into vans outside Sturgis. He'd seen it in the mirror on the worst nights, when the whiskey didn't work and the memories did. It was the look of someone who'd stopped screaming because screaming didn't work anymore. Snake Tattoo was saying something to the girl, his lips moving fast, his free hand gesturing. The girl nodded mechanically, her head bobbing like a puppet's. They were 20 feet away now, moving toward Rufus, moving toward the exit. And then just as they were about to pass him, the little girl's head snapped up. Her eyes met Rufus's, and her face changed. Her mouth dropped open, not in a scream, but in a silent, gaping horror. 1 second, the little girl's face was blank, obedient, dead-eyed. The next, her jaw unhinged like a trapdoor, her eyes went wide as dinner plates, and every muscle in her face contorted into a mask of pure terror. It was theatrical, almost fake-looking, except for the realness burning in those eyes. She was performing fear. No, she was showing fear. and she was looking directly at Rufus while she did it. The man's snake tattoo didn't notice. He was too busy scanning the aisle, checking for security cameras, muttering something under his breath about just 5 more minutes, and almost there. But Rufus noticed everything. The little girl held his gaze. Her free hand, the one not being crushed in the man's grip, came up slowly, deliberately. 5 fingers spread wide, then 4, then 3. What the hell? She was counting down. 2 fingers. 1. Then she made a fist and pressed it against her chest, right over her heart. The universal sign that coaches taught kids in Little League. The sign that meant time out. The sign that meant I need help. And just like that, her face snapped back to neutral. The mask returned, obedient, blank, moving. The whole thing had taken maybe 3 seconds. But Rufus had spent 2 decades learning to read people in the time it took them to blink. You didn't survive in the clubs without that skill. You didn't make it through Rawlins State Penitentiary without knowing when someone was lying, when they were scared, when they were about to pull a shank. This little girl had just told him everything without making a sound. And suddenly, the makeup made sense. It wasn't Halloween. It wasn't some goth phase. She'd smeared it on the dark circles. The hollow look to make herself look sick, disturbing, wrong. To make people stop and stare. To make them notice her. Because nobody notices a normal-looking kid with a man in a grocery store. That's just a dad and his daughter buying cereal. But a kid who looks like a horror movie extra, that makes people look twice. Smart. Terrifyingly smart. Which meant she'd been planning this. Which meant she'd been waiting for anyone to see the signal. And Rufus had seen it. Snake Tattoo yanked her forward, and the girl stumbled, her sneakers squeaking. They were 15 feet away now. 10. About to brush right past Rufus, on their way to the registers, to the parking lot, to a van, or a truck, or whatever hole this bastard had crawled out of. Rufus felt his hands curl into fists. The basket hit the floor with a plastic crack, coffee can rolling. Nobody around them flinched, too lost in their own worlds, their phones, their shopping lists. Snake Tattoo's head snapped toward the noise. His eyes met Rufus's for the first time, and in that instant, Rufus saw it. The recognition, the calculation, the panic of a predator who just realized he'd been spotted by something bigger. The man's hand moved to his pocket. Time slowed. Rufus took 1 step forward, and the little girl whispered 2 words that cut through the grocery store hum like a blade. Help me. Rufus didn't run. Running would have caused a scene. Running would have made Snake Tattoo bolt, dragging the girl into a chaos that could end with her hurt, or worse. Rufus had been in enough bad situations to know that sometimes the scariest thing you could do was move slowly. So he walked. Thump. His right boot hit the linoleum. Thump. His left followed. Thump, thump, thump. Each step deliberate. Each step closing the distance. The sound echoed through the aisle like a countdown clock, and Snake Tattoo heard it. The man's shoulders stiffened. His head twitched to the side, not quite looking back, but aware, hyper-aware. The little girl's eyes flicked toward Rufus again, then quickly away. She knew not to stare. She knew not to give it away. Smart kid. Too damn smart for whatever hell she'd been living through. Snake Tattoo tried to speed up, tugging her harder. Come on, Shalom, we're late, your mom's waiting. His voice was too loud, too insistent. The kind of forced cheerfulness that screamed liar. So her name was Shalom, peace. The irony wasn't lost on Rufus. Thump, thump, thump. They reached the end of the cereal aisle. Snake Tattoo veered left toward the front registers, pulling Shalom along like luggage. But Rufus didn't follow them down the same path. He cut through the bread section, moving parallel, keeping them in his peripheral vision. He knew the layout of stores like this. They were all the same. Small-town America, cookie-cutter floor plans. There were 3 exits: front door, side emergency door by the loading bay, back door through the employee break room. Snake Tattoo was headed for the front. Rufus moved faster now, his boots eating up the distance. He passed a teenager, stocking shelves, kid had earbuds in, didn't even look up. He passed an old man comparing prices on instant coffee. He passed a mother with a crying baby. Nobody saw what he saw. Nobody cared. And that was the thing about America that made Rufus's blood boil. Everybody was so buried in their own little worlds, their own little problems, that they couldn't see the wolves walking among them. But Rufus could. He emerged at the front of the store, near the customer service desk, and there, 30 feet away, was Snake Tattoo, dragging Shalom toward the checkout lanes. The man's head was on a swivel now, scanning, looking for cameras, looking for rent-a-cops, looking for threats. Rufus stepped into his line of sight and stopped. Just stood there, right in the middle of the main aisle, arms loose at his sides, feet planted, a human roadblock. The patches on his vest caught the fluorescent light, the death's head, the red and white lettering, the rocker that said W Wyoming in letters that didn't ask permission. Snake Tattoo froze. For 3 heartbeats, they stared at each other across the expanse of cheap linoleum and shopping carts. Predator, recognizing predator. Except one of them had nothing to lose, and the other had a little girl's wrist in his hand. Slowly, deliberately, Rufus reached up and removed his sunglasses. His eyes were pale gray, the color of winter storms, and they were locked on. Snake Tattoo like rifle sights. I see you. The message was clear, unmistakable. I see what you are. I see what you're doing, and I'm not looking away. Snake Tattoo's face went through a rapid evolution: confusion, anger, fear, calculation. His Adam's apple bobbed. His free hand, the one not gripping Shalom, moved to his pocket again, and this time Rufus saw the outline of something small and hard, pressing against the denim. A knife. Maybe a gun. Didn't matter. Shalom's eyes had gone wide again, but this time with something that looked dangerously close to hope. And Snake Tattoo made his choice. He yanked the girl hard enough to make her yelp, and ran. But Rufus was faster. 3 strides and he was cutting across the checkout lanes, his massive frame moving with the efficiency of a man who'd spent decades fighting in tight spaces. A cashier gasped and stumbled backward. A customer's cart clattered into a magazine rack. Rufus planted himself directly in front of the automatic doors. Snake Tattoo skidded to a halt, Shalom jerking forward with the momentum. The man's eyes were wild now, darting between Rufus and the exit, calculating odds he didn't like. "Excuse me?" His voice cracked. "We need to get through." Rufus didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there like a mountain that had decided to grow roots in the middle of the doorway. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low it barely qualified as a whisper, but it carried the weight of iron. "She looks sick, buddy." He gestured toward Shalom with his chin. "You need help?" Snake Tattoo's face twitched. "She's fine, we're fine. Just we're late and her mom's waiting in the car." "That right?" Rufus's eyes never left the man's face. "Because she don't look fine. She looks like something out of a funeral home. It's makeup. From school. Drama club thing." The lies were coming faster now, tumbling over each other. "She's my niece. Shalom, tell the nice man you're fine." Shalom's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes pleaded silently with Rufus. "She's just acting up," Snake Tattoo continued, his grip on her wrist visibly tightening. The girl winced. "You know how kids are. Dramatic. She wanted candy, I said no. Now she's throwing a tantrum." Behind the man's back, where he couldn't see, Shalom was shaking her head, side to side, frantic, her whole body trembling. No, no, no. Rufus saw it. A woman in line behind them cleared her throat nervously. "Sir, if you could just maybe let them through? You're blocking—" Rufus didn't even glance at her. His full attention was locked on Snake Tattoo, and the air between them had gone thick with something electric and dangerous. "Here's what I think," Rufus said, his voice dropping even lower, forcing the man to lean in to hear it. "I think you're a liar. I think she ain't your niece, and I think you know that I know." Snake Tattoo's face went pale, then flushed red. "Listen, asshole, you can't just— this is harassment. I'm calling the cops." "Good." Rufus crossed his arms over his chest, the leather of his vest creaking. "Call 'em, I'll wait." For a moment, nobody moved. The store had gone quiet, that terrible, anticipatory silence that happens right before violence breaks out. The cashiers had stopped scanning. Customers had backed away, phones out, recording or dialing 911, or just watching like this was entertainment. Snake Tattoo's hand went to his pocket. Rufus's hand shot out like a striking snake, faster than a man his size had any right to move, and clamped around the man's wrist before it could withdraw whatever was in that pocket. "Don't," Rufus said, and Snake Tattoo's other hand, the one holding Shalom, let go. The girl stumbled backward, free, gasping, and then she screamed one word that made every head in the store turn. "Run." Snake Tattoo moved first. He ripped his wrist free from Rufus's grip and shoved the nearest cashier, a teenage girl, who went sprawling into her register with a cry. Then he lunged for Shalom, snatching her by the hood of her green sweatshirt and hauling her toward the doors like she weighed nothing. The automatic doors hissed open. Cold Wyoming air rushed in, carrying the smell of diesel and rain-soaked asphalt. Rufus exploded forward. For a big man, 260 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, he moved like a freight train coming off the rails. His boots pounded the linoleum, then hit concrete as he burst through the doors 3 seconds behind them. The parking lot was grey and vast, puddles reflecting the overcast sky. A few scattered cars, a shopping cart corral. No witnesses except an old woman loading groceries who took one look at the scene and dropped her bags. Snake Tattoo was dragging Shalom toward a beat-up Ford Ranger, rust-orange and ancient, parked in the back corner like he'd planned his exit route. Smart, except he hadn't planned on Rufus. "Stop!" Rufus's voice boomed across the lot like thunder. Snake Tattoo spun around, and when he did, his hand came out of his pocket holding 5 inches of folded steel. The blade snapped open with a click that sounded unnaturally loud in the parking lot silence. A knife. Of course it was a knife. Shalom screamed and tried to twist away, but the man had a fistful of her sweatshirt. His eyes were manic now, cornered, animal, wild. "Back off, I swear to God." "You'll what?" Rufus didn't slow down, didn't even break stride. "Cut me?" He said it like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. Snake Tattoo slashed the air between them, a warning strike meant to keep distance. The blade caught the grey light, wicked and sharp. Rufus walked right into range. What happened next took maybe 2 seconds, but every witness would swear later it looked like slow motion. Snake Tattoo thrust the knife forward, aiming for Rufus's gut. But Rufus had seen that move 100 times in 100 prison yards. He pivoted, letting the blade pass within an inch of his vest, and his right hand came down like a hammer on the man's wrist. Bone cracked. Snake Tattoo screamed. The knife clattered to the asphalt. And Rufus didn't stop. His left hand grabbed the man's shirt, yanked him forward, and his right fist, scarred knuckles, and 53 years of barely controlled rage connected with Snake Tattoo's jaw with a sound like a baseball bat hitting wet meat. The man's head snapped sideways, his legs buckled. Shalom scrambled backward, free again, her green sweatshirt torn at the collar. Snake Tattoo tried to get up, blood streaming from his mouth, and Rufus put a boot on his chest and pressed. Not enough to break ribs, just enough to make it clear. Stay down. You done? Rufus's voice was eerily calm, like he was asking about the weather. The man gurgled something that might have been a yes, and then Rufus heard it. The high-pitched wail of sirens, getting closer, getting loud. He looked up and saw Shalom staring at him with those dark-circled eyes, not scared of him, scared for him, and she mouthed two words. They're coming. 2 Wyoming State Patrol cruisers came in hot, tires squealing on wet asphalt, light bars painting the parking lot in strobing red and blue. Rufus didn't move, just kept his boot on Snake Tattoo's chest, his breathing heavy, adrenaline still singing through his veins. Blood spattered his knuckles, his vest was askew. To anyone pulling up to this scene, he looked like exactly what he was, a Hell's Angel standing over a beaten man. The cruiser's doors flew open in unison. On the ground, now, 2 troopers, service weapons drawn, advancing in tactical stance. The younger one, buzz-cut, probably fresh from the academy, had his Glock aimed directly at Rufus's center mass. The older one, grey at the temples, was sweeping the scene, trying to make sense of the chaos. A crowd had formed. Maybe 20 people, phones out, recording everything. The old woman who'd dropped her groceries, the cashiers who'd followed them outside, a truck driver who'd been pumping gas across the street. All of them watching as the tattooed biker was about to get taken down. Rufus slowly raised his hands, palms out. "Easy," he said, his voice level. "It ain't what it looks like." "I said on the ground." "Wait," the older trooper started to say. But before Rufus could move, before the situation could tip over that edge into gunfire and tragedy, a small green shape rocketed across the asphalt and slammed into Rufus's leg. Shalom. She wrapped both arms around his thigh like a vice, her face pressed against the worn leather of his jeans, and she screamed at the cops with a voice that could have shattered glass. "No, don't hurt him, he saved me." The world froze. The younger trooper's aim wavered, confusion flooding his face. The older one lowered his weapon slightly, eyes darting between the little girl, the biker, and the bleeding man on the ground. "He saved me," Shalom said again, sobbing now, the words tumbling out between gasps. "That man, he took me. He's not my uncle. He was gonna—" She couldn't finish, just held on to Rufus like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. The visual was impossible to ignore. A tiny girl in a bright green sweatshirt, face smeared with theatrical makeup, clinging to a mountain of leather and ink, while the actual villain bled on the pavement. "Sir," the older trooper said, his weapon now pointed at Snake Tattoo instead. "Sir, is this true?" Rufus looked down at Shalom. Her small hands were trembling where they gripped his jeans. Then he looked back at the trooper and said, "The only thing that mattered. Check her wrists." The younger trooper moved in, carefully, and when he knelt beside Shalom and gently took her hand, everyone saw it. Dark purple bruises, finger-shaped, ringing both of her tiny wrists like handcuffs made of pain. "Jesus Christ," someone in the crowd whispered. The older trooper's face went stone-hard. He kicked the knife away from Snake Tattoo's reach and barked into his radio. "Dispatch, we need an ambulance and child services to the Save-A-Lot on Yellowstone, possible 207A. Suspect in custody." Snake Tattoo groaned and tried to sit up. The trooper put a knee in his back. "Don't even think about it." Rufus finally let himself breathe. His hands were still raised, but Shalom hadn't let go of his leg. The older trooper holstered his weapon and looked at Rufus with something between respect and wariness. "What's your name, son?" "Rufus Thorne." The trooper's eyes flicked to the patches on his vest. Recognition sparked. "You're the one who—" But before he could finish, the younger trooper's radio crackled to life with a voice that made everyone's blood run cold. "All units, be advised we have a second vehicle approaching the scene at high speed." A silver Subaru came tearing into the parking lot, engines screaming, and for one heart-stopping second, everyone thought it was an accomplice coming to finish what Snake Tattoo had started. Guns came back up. The Subaru skidded to a stop 20 feet away, door flying open before the engine even cut off, and a man came stumbling out mid-30s, glasses, wearing a button-down shirt with paint stains on the sleeves. "Shalom!" His voice cracked with raw panic. "Shalom!" The little girl's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, wider than they'd been even during the face switch, and she screamed with pure joy. "Daddy!" She released Rufus's leg and ran. A green blur across wet asphalt, and the man dropped to his knees and caught her like she was made of glass and gold. They collapsed together, sobbing, and the sound of it, the raw relief, the animal terror finally released, made even the younger trooper look away and blink hard. The older trooper lowered his weapon, spoke into his radio. "Disregard the second vehicle, we have the father on scene." It took 20 minutes for the pieces to fall into place. Snake Tattoo, real name Travis Lee Hutchins, was a drifter with warrants in Montana, Idaho, and Utah. Sexual assault, attempted kidnapping, possession of materials that made the troopers' faces go dark when they checked his record. He'd been watching the Casper Community Theater for 3 weeks, waiting for an opportunity. Today, during a Wednesday afternoon rehearsal for some kids' play about pioneers, he'd grabbed Shalom when she'd gone outside to get something from her dad's car. She was only alone for 2 minutes. Her father kept saying, tears streaming down his face. 2 goddamn minutes. The makeup, the dark circles, the hollow look had been from the play. She was supposed to be a ghost. But when Travis grabbed her, Shalom had done something brilliant. She'd smeared it worse, made herself look sick and disturbing, because her father had taught her something most parents never think to teach. "If you're ever in trouble," her dad explained to the troopers, his voice shaking, "make yourself noticeable. Make yourself look wrong. Make people have to look at you." Shalom had remembered. And when she saw Rufus, a man who looked scary enough that people would listen if he said something was wrong, she'd switched her face, showed him the terror, counted down, signaled, bet everything on a stranger in leather. Now, sitting on the back bumper of an ambulance while a paramedic checked her vitals, Shalom looked over at Rufus. He was standing apart from everyone, giving his statement to the older trooper, his arms crossed over his massive chest. "That's the man who saved me," she said to the paramedic, pointing. "The biker." Her father followed her gaze, stared at Rufus, the patches, the tattoos, the beard, the scars. Everything about him screamed danger, everything except what he'd done. The father stood up, walked across the parking lot, stopped in front of Rufus. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, a clean-cut theater dad and a Hell's Angel, 2 men from different worlds standing on the same patch of cracked Wyoming asphalt. Then the father extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for seeing her." Rufus looked at the offered hand. Then he took it. The handshake was firm, brief, and said more than 1,000 words could have. "She's a smart kid," Rufus said quietly. "You taught her well." The father's eyes welled up again. He nodded, couldn't speak, just squeezed Rufus's hand one more time and walked back to his daughter. Rufus watched them for a moment, the reunion, the paramedics, the normal life that had almost been destroyed, then turned to head toward his bike. "Wait!" Shalom's voice, small but fierce. She came running over, her father trailing behind, and she stopped right in front of Rufus. For the first time, she saw him up close without terror in her heart. Saw the grey eyes that had locked onto her signal, saw the scarred knuckles that had saved her. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Everyone else just looked away. Rufus was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone watching. He knelt down, got down on one knee so he was at her eye level, and when he did, his face transformed. The hard lines softened, the storm-grey eyes warmed, and he smiled a real, genuine smile that made him look like somebody's grandfather instead of somebody's nightmare. "Because," he said softly, "somebody's got to look out for the little guys." Shalom stared at him. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck. The crowd, watching the cashiers, the paramedics, the troopers, the phone-recording strangers all saw it. A little girl in a green sweatshirt hugging a Hell's Angel in a parking lot in Casper, Wyoming. And every single person there understood they'd just witnessed something rare, something good. But as Rufus stood up and walked toward his Harley, the older trooper's voice stopped him cold. "Mr. Thorne, there's something you should know about Hutchins." Rufus turned back. "What's that?" The trooper's face was grim. He had a list, 12 names, all kids from that theater program. He paused. Shalom was number 7. The words hung in the cold Wyoming air like a curse. But they also meant something else. Those other 11 kids were safe now, because one biker had stopped to look. Travis Lee Hutchins was loaded into the back of a cruiser, headed for a cell that would hold him for the rest of his miserable life. The doors slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. 3 states wanted him. Wyoming would keep him. The territory was safe again. Rufus walked to his Harley, his boots heavy on the asphalt. He'd given his statement, shaken the right hands, and now it was time to disappear back into the vastness of the American West, like he'd never been there at all. But Shalom wasn't done with him yet. She ran over one more time, her father following, and she held out something small in her palm. It was a pin from the theater production, a tiny silver star with the word hero etched across it. "This is yours," she said, her voice steady now, strong. "You were the real hero today." Rufus looked at the pin, then at the little girl with the smeared makeup and the bright green sweatshirt and the eyes that had trusted a stranger when no one else would help. He knelt down again and did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He unpinned the small leather patch from his vest, the one that said Wyoming in faded red letters, the one that had ridden with him through 10,000 miles of open road, and he pressed it into her hand. "You keep this," he said quietly. "Means you're protected, means you're family now. Any club member sees this, they know you're one of ours." Shalom's eyes went wide. Her father put a hand on her shoulder, understanding the weight of what had just happened. "What's my road name?" she whispered. Rufus smiled, that grandfatherly smile again. "Firefly, because you lit up the dark when it mattered most." He stood, threw a leg over his Harley, and fired up the engine. The rumble echoed across the parking lot, not a sound of menace anymore, but of justice riding off into the sunset. As he rolled toward the highway, Rufus glanced in his mirror one last time. The little girl who'd looked like a ghost in a grocery store was now standing tall, clutching a patch, smiling through tears. The world was full of snakes, predators hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment. But as long as men like Rufus Thorne kept riding the fence line rough, weathered and righteous, the lambs would always have a fighting chance. Because blood makes you related, but the code makes you family. If you believe that sometimes the scariest-looking person in the room is the only one brave enough to do what's right, then like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories about American protectors, modern-day heroes, and the Brotherhood that still rides the fence line when everyone else looks away. Also, check out the 2 videos showing on your screen right now. They're specially crafted for you.